Hello and welcome to International Daily Roundup by People's Dispatch, where we bring you some of the major news developments from across the globe. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Thursday was charged by the country's Attorney General on 3 counts of corruption. This makes him the first Israeli Prime Minister to be indicted on criminal charges while still in office. Netanyahu was charged with committing bribery, fraud, and breach of trust after 3 years of extensive investigation in 3 different scandals. The 3 corruption cases brought against the Prime Minister are Case 1000, Case 2000, and Case 4000. In Case 1000, Netanyahu and his wife Sarah allegedly received lavish gifts in return for political favors. Case 2000 involves Netanyahu being caught on video asking Arnon Moses, the publisher of Israel's daily newspapers, to give him and his government better coverage instead of criticizing his government. In return, Netanyahu promised Moses legislation against his competitor. In the most serious of the 3 cases, that is Case 4000, Netanyahu stands accused of granting regulatory favors worth around $500 million to Israeli telecommunications giant Bezeq Telecom in exchange for positive coverage of himself and his family. If found guilty, Netanyahu could be facing up to 10 years in prison for bribery, along with 3 years in prison for fraud and breach of trust. The past week saw the anniversaries of 2 major protests. The anti-systemic protests in Lebanon completed 1 month on November 17th. In the past month, the massive rallies against the government, system of governance and its neoliberal policies brought down a prime minister and have asked tough questions of the country's leaders and its political system. We talked to Jana Nakhal of the Lebanese Communist Party on the way ahead for the protesters. Right now, especially from the side of the left, what would be the concrete, goals as well as the path that the organization see as the way ahead?
So we're thinking about 2 parallel, let's say, chores. First of all, decentralized organizing, because all the time just linking people to Beirut is really it's unfair to actually work. And we're doing this. We're organizing in all the regions, trying to connect, trying to see what each of the regions needs from a local perspective, from a more, in the field perspective, with individuals and groups, trying to see what the demands are, the let's say sub-demands of the regions are. This is 1. 2, creating communal alternatives. What we have discovered in this intifada is that people are really aware of what community is and what solidarity is and what communal support and activity is. I'm talking about organizing at the level of, because we're expecting a food crisis, we're expecting an economic crisis in general. So we're talking about organizing at the level of something that looks like a cooperative, like cooperatives, unions, groups of professionals and people that have similar interests from around the regions, connecting and working together in order for us to, whenever the economic crisis is going to take place, whenever the lira is going to be hit, in order for us to have an actual communal network on the ground, in the regions, to support the most disenfranchised who are going to be facing this blow more directly.
And the main demand, I understand, still remains the complete a new constitution and the complete re-envisioning of the system. So what kind of a system is being envisioned by the left?
We're talking about a system that approaches the situation from a social justice perspective. We're talking about a system which does not support privatization. We're talking about a system which is not neoliberal in its essence. So this is the kind of state and the kind of economic, social system that we're trying to push forward to.
And you would like these aspects to be specifically written into the constitution?
Definitely. We're talking in terms of institutions, but we know that this is a long-term thing. So the first step we're talking about is an interim government, which will change first and foremost the current electoral law, because this is an electoral law that is continuously reproducing the same elite in power. So we need a new electoral law that would allow the reproduction of the intifada into the parliament, that the intifada is represented in the parliament, so it can actually then impose changes in the institution as well as in the existing law at all levels. And this is what we think that would be the first two steps into the changes of the system in Lebanon.
It's also been a year since the Yellow Vests protests broke out in France, leaving an indelible mark on the country's polity and society. While the results of the movement have been mixed, it did force the politicians of France and its president to temporarily respond to the people's concerns. Nonetheless, major questions remain on the future of the movement. Here is a look at some of the key challenges faced by the movement and its prospects. To begin with, they faced immense repression from the police. At least 4 people have died and some estimates have put the number at 10. Thousands have been injured and dozens have been disabled. Over 15,200 people have been arrested, with at least 1,000 people being imprisoned. On the other hand, the police have enjoyed complete immunity, with only 2 of its members being indicted till now for all this violence. As we mentioned earlier, the lack of formal structures and a clear agenda has given the space to far-right elements to attempt to drive the movement in favor of their interests. The media and the government, however, have exaggerated the influence of these far-right movements and painted the whole movement as being fascistic. Marine Le Pen, leader of the far-right national rally, has also used the right-wing participation to her advantage. She has tried to portray the movement as being anti-migrant and in line with her policies. However, it's important to know that she has also rejected the demands for increase in minimum wages and pensions. And finally, the Yellow Vests have since the beginning rejected all political parties and unions and expressed deep distrust in bureaucracy of all kinds. And although the left and the unions in the country have been trying to steer the movement in a more progressive direction, they have not been too successful. During the European parliamentary elections in May, major sections of the Yellow Vests are believed to have voted for the national rally in order to defeat Macron, although Macron's list was still successful. The left in the country has recognized that ousting Macron cannot be the only agenda if major social and economic transformation is to be achieved. Simply replacing Macron with another similar neoliberal figurehead will not yield any kind of justice or equity of any sort. The structures that create and perpetuate this inequality need to be exposed and dismantled by the French people. What is the future of the movement? The number of participants in the movement is much less now, and there are a number of reasons. One, of course, is the exhaustion of the movement not really going anywhere after the initial victories. The lack of a common progressive agenda for all the protesters is yet another reason. And then, of course, there's a constant violent police repression and media distortion, which is also not helping protests. However, the number of people continuing the fight cannot be ignored. Such crystallized discontent among the people seems inextinguishable in the near future. The ultra-right-wing components in society are trying to push the protests in a single direction with one agenda, ousting Macron. They're also aiming for electoral dividends by channelizing the protests against refugees and migrants, thereby polarizing the country. But the left in France is making many efforts to orient the protest to achieve much-needed social reforms in the country. They're actively organizing mobilizations of working class, students, youth, etc. on the sidelines of the larger movement. They're aware of the fact that just replacing Macron will not solve the problem. 2 weeks ago, a countrywide meeting of the Yellow Vests, called the Assembly of Assemblies, decided to join France's largest trade union, CGT, in the general strike scheduled to begin on December 5th. The fight is definitely not over. That's all we have for this episode of the International Daily Roundup. To know more about these stories, visit our website peoplesdispatch.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Thanks for watching. Cantar que vamos a triunfar, avanza